My name is Jason. I work in a local clothing store. We basically sell stuff that people think is really fancy, but it's basically the same stuff you can find at any clothing store, even places like Walmart or Goodwill sometimes. I've had this job for about 2 years now, and while it isn't the greatest, a job is a job. I get to earn enough money to be able to have some independence from my parents, which is really nice. This story took place in the winter of last year. It was a good while after Christmas, but I don't remember exactly when it happened. I just remember there being snow on the ground the next morning after it all went down. So I work pretty usual hours for a college student. I know I'm technically a full-time student, but it doesn't feel like I have a whole lot of classes. Maybe I picked an easy major, or maybe I'm a genius, who knows. But I don't really study and I barely do the homework, and I still manage to get pretty good grades. I remember there being a very strange-looking man that started coming into the store. He didn't seem like the usual kind of customer that we would get. Most of the people that shop at the store are at least upper middle class. I don't mean to say that they were rich or anything, but if you had enough money to buy expensive clothes, I'm talking like $50 for a t-shirt, then you're probably doing pretty well for yourself. But not this guy. This guy looked like he was 2 steps away from being homeless. He had this really pale hair. Most of it was covered under a dingy black hat that he wore on his head, and you could only see this white hair as it stuck out from a few places from under the hat. He was an older guy, but not too old, probably 50 years old or something like that, but judging by how much of a weirdo he was, I guess I can't really be all that sure. He started coming in every single day, and he always bought something. It was not always something big. Sometimes it was a $70 pair of pants. Other time it was a really expensive watch. However, with as much stuff as he bought, he never seemed to wear any of it, though. At least not from any of the times I'd ever seen him. He always dressed in a baggy sweatshirt or really old, worn-out overalls with a denim jacket on top, and the denim jacket had cuts and holes, and it looked really weird because his overalls would be denim too. I don't know if he thought it went well as an outfit, but I wasn't about to tell this guy he dressed stupidly. After all, I did get a commission for everything that was sold in the store. However much of a creep he may have been, I will gladly welcome his business. I know the really weird thing I noticed about him was that he never actually tried on the clothes that he was buying, like ever. He would spend 40 minutes analyzing a pair of pants, hold it in front of himself in the mirror, feel the texture and try to look at it from different points of view, but he would never actually go into the dressing room and try them on. I thought that was the weirdest thing of all. I also remember the couple of times he wouldn't buy the item that he had been looking at, and there would always be this really musky smell to them. I know this may sound weird, but out of morbid curiosity, I would smell clothes after people tried them on after the store had closed. I can't really smell much otherwise, like I had seen this guy at least 20 different times and I never got a smell of him. But whenever I smelled those clothes that he had been looking at, I could smell some strange combination of body odor and smoke. I got really curious about what he does when he isn't randomly buying clothes in an expensive and overpriced store like this one. There was also this one time that he came into the store and specifically asked for me. I thought that was pretty weird considering that he had never really struck up a conversation with me or anything. Of all the times that I had interacted with him, it was always on a very formal basis, and we both said the very bare minimum necessary. It was obvious that he didn't like coming to the store, and I found myself drawing a blank, coming up with reasons as to why he kept on doing it. I didn't think too much of it, though. I was a college student, and anything outside of chilling with my friends and getting my assignments done didn't really matter at all that much to me. I remember this one night that I was doing laundry. I normally hate doing laundry, as you might imagine, but I specifically remember putting my clothes into the washing machine. I got a whiff of one of my sweatshirts that I thought smelled really weird. I smelled my sweatshirt again, and it reminded me of the smell of the clothes from this one freaky guy at my job. Well, the next day I was working my shift as usual, and here came in the same old dude. This time he was checking out a pair of shoes, literally a pair of Crocs. I didn't even understand why we had Crocs at the store in the first place. They were exactly the same as the ones you can get at Walmart, except for the fact that we charged $60 for them instead of $15. Well, this guy spent about 45 minutes looking at this pair of crops before he decided it was time to head out. He came up to my register and took an unusually long period of time to pay for his Crocs. And it was while he was reaching for his wallet and paying that I remembered something. I totally forgot that I don't wear my sweatshirt at work. It's against the rules. You have to dress kind of nice, which normally meant a polo shirt or a decent dress shirt. Something you could throw a vest over and look like a halfway decently dressed representative of a fashion store. It got me on this whole train of thought that made me realize that my sweatshirt didn't smell that way because I was spending too much time with this weird guy. He must have somehow gotten a hold of my sweatshirt on his own accord. I remember my heart falling to the pit of my stomach when I made the realization. I felt myself turn red and started to sweat. However, freaked out as I became, he took no notice, just kept paying for his goofy pair of green Crocs. If you had ever smelled the smell, you would understand just how distinct it really was. I mean, there was nothing in the world like it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was a good possibility that this guy was creeping on me somehow, maybe even getting into my house. I quit my job that day on the spot. I didn't want to put myself in jeopardy for a goofy retail job, especially because that guy showed no sign of ever slowing down. He was there every single day I worked. A couple of weeks after the incident, I asked some of my former coworkers if he was still showing up on a regular basis. They told me they didn't remember exactly when, but he stopped coming in right around the time I stopped working there. This only made me more paranoid about the whole situation. I've developed a couple of possible theories as to what exactly was going on with this guy, but none of them really make any sense. I've tried telling a couple of my family members about it, but they all think I'm trolling them. To this day, I still haven't figured out exactly what happened, and I'm honestly kind of worried that I never will know what this creepy guy at the retail store was doing there every day, or why he stopped going after I quit. The worst experience of my life happened on June 20th, 2019. I was working at a local store. It's kind of a chain in this region of America, and I don't want to give out the name because it will make it obvious who I am. This story did get some media coverage, and as much as I want to share my story with the world in an honest way, I also want to remain as anonymous as possible. I don't want the rest of my life to forever be associated with this event, but this is how it went. My family's been struggling since 2015. My grandma got cancer, and we did our best to put her through chemotherapy. It didn't work out, and she tragically passed away that year. For some kind of legal reason, the financial burden of my grandmother's chemotherapy fell on my father. It just put a serious economic strain on him. I mean, could you imagine someone wants you to pay over $100,000 for medical treatment that didn't even save your family member? I don't understand why the system does this to people, but I'll keep politics out of this. It didn't ruin our family, but it did mean that our middle-class lifestyle was now going to be extremely difficult to maintain. There was a lot less food in the house. We weren't able to go on vacation anymore, and making ends meet was generally a struggle. I remember my parents having a lot of fights over money, and I think it put a real strain on our relationship. Well, I was in high school at the time, and I did my best not to notice. It's tough being a high school girl and not being able to afford nice clothes or makeup, especially when you were not born naturally beautiful. I remember some of the wealthier popular girls making fun of me for dressing like a bag lady, but sometimes a sweatshirt was the only thing that I had without any holes. I was an only child, so thankfully I was the only person that had to suffer along with my parents. High school went by, and don't get me wrong, it wasn't pleasant, but I got through it. And my family survived on too. As time went on, we just found ways to cope without having money. I knew that I was going to have to start getting a part-time job in school, which I was honestly kind of looking forward to. My parents told me that they would let me use my money on whatever I wanted, which I had been looking forward to for months. And that's when I got an after-school job at this local chain store. It's kind of hard to explain. It's a weird combination of a deli, a gas station, and a convenience store all nicely wrapped into one with a very strange name that is almost notorious in this region. Well, I was enjoying my time, especially because this was the summer between junior and senior year of high school. I was excited to graduate because I had really good grades and I was already receiving scholarship opportunities, some of them full rides to very nice colleges in my state. My parents were really proud of me, and as hard as it had been, we were ultimately a happy family at the end of the day. So I pretty much worked as much as I could over the summer. I was still kind of a loner by this point, and I wanted to turn as much of my time into money as possible. So it didn't really matter if I spent 80 hours a week working because I didn't really have that much to do outside of work, especially with school being out for the summer. I remember there being a particular night that my manager asked me to work a little bit over. I normally started my shift at 6 a.m. and went home at 4 p.m. This was a pretty nice schedule, honestly, and work was easy enough that I really didn't mind. Sure, during the rush hours it could get a little hectic, but all the time in between was pretty chill. Well, my manager wanted me to stay until 10 p.m. that night. That was a lot later than I was used to, and I wouldn't have said yes, but I wasn't working the next day, so I figured why not. I also got double time for working, which made it even better. You see, the way this place works is that after 8 p.m., most of the bakery closes down and there are a lot less people on site. Normally, this time from 8 and well into the night, it's normally just enough people to run the register and get people to pay for gas. It normally means about 2 people working at a time. Me and this one guy I really didn't care for had to work this together. His name was Jeremy. He gave me really weird vibes and had made inappropriate comments. He wasn't dirty or perverted or anything, but he was just extremely offensive and never held back a nasty insult whenever he felt like throwing one at you. Me and him had a couple of instances where we argued, but by this point we both knew where we stood. We didn't like each other, but both of us wanted to do our job and get paid without too much of a hassle, so we were at least in a functional working relationship for the sake of our jobs. This was a weekday night and it just happened to be particularly slow. I never really worked there later shifts, so I had no idea what to really expect. And then my memory goes blank. For hours. I had no idea what had happened. I just remember waking up in the middle of the store and getting up and feeling really sick. I was dizzy and confused, and it took me a few minutes to realize where I was or what had happened. I remembered as I walked across the tiled floor, I heard a deep crunching noise beneath my feet. I didn't look down. I was too dazed, but I assumed that they were M&Ms or some kind of candy. After walking outside, I got even more confused than I already was. I went back inside and saw blood. I looked down at my shoes and noticed that I was covered in a thick, dark red liquid. I started hyperventilating, called 911. They were there within minutes. I was rushed to the hospital, and that was that. It was only a couple of days after explaining everything to the police that I pieced together what had happened. When I was at the hospital, they found drugs in my system. This surprised me because I didn't even smoke cigarettes. The drugs they found in my system were likely the kind that you find in roofies or whatever, and the police had a theory that it went something like this. Jeremy was a mentally unstable individual. He decided that he wanted to end his own life. He was kind of obsessed with becoming infamous. He even ran a whole bunch of social media accounts where he was desperately attempting to become a celebrity. Well, he figured the only way he was ever going to become truly famous was if he committed some kind of horrible crime in some terrible fashion that shocked the world. And he decided that it was going to be that night with me there. The police believed that as crazy as he may have been, he wasn't a fundamentally violent person, so he couldn't bring himself to hurt me or anything else like that. But he did have a plan. He slipped a roofie or some kind of drug into my monster that I'd been drinking during that shift. After I passed out, he shot himself in the head staring at the security camera. He even set up his smartphone on a tripod to capture it in hope that it would be used as footage on the news. I'm pretty sure they did actually use it. And when I had woken up, the crunchy stuff on the floor, or fragments, was a skull. This all had been really traumatic, and I don't know what to do anymore. I quit my job, and I've just been hanging out at my house over the summer waiting for school to start back up, kind of staring into space. My parents have been really understanding, but they have no idea how to help me. Despite our bad financial situation, they scraped together enough money to send me to therapy. I haven't had a whole lot of time to recover from this whole situation, but I do feel like I've made some progress. Some days I feel extremely apathetic. There's a big part of me that doesn't know what to do with my life now. I feel so different after having gone through this experience, especially because I still get contacted by the occasional journalist wanting to do another story on this. But I think this will be the final and last time that I have to relive this. This is a somewhat horrifying but also hilarious story that happened to my best friend. Me and him were sports players together when we were younger and have always been close ever since. His name is Brian, and we were about 20 years old when the story happened. He had just gotten a job at GameStop. He was really excited about being able to get discounts on games and to even be able to play games a few days early in some cases with the new releases. Me and him both loved playing video games together, and it was probably a dream job in a lot of ways. Now, my friend Brian is a great guy, but he isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, if you catch my drift. On the football field or the basketball field or even in Call of Duty, he's probably the best. But when it came to reading a book or passing the test, well, let's just say that he would be on the bench if he could for all that kind of stuff. Things started out one day when we both decided that we wanted to start playing horror games. I had watched a Let's Play of Resident Evil. I thought it would be a really fun idea. He wasn't a big fan of horror, but he was willing to play whatever games we could get, especially because he got such a nice employee discount at GameStop. We had spent one Friday night playing Resident Evil until 4 o'clock in the morning. I didn't even have anywhere to be the next day, and he wasn't working until 12, so we figured that there was no harm, no foul. Now, before I go any further, I would just like to say that your brain is like a sponge. You absorb information and stimuli and process it in various ways. Sometimes your brain can process information in a way that you might not expect it to do. Sometimes things can really stick with you. They can really play a role in your psyche, and I think Resident Evil did that for my friend Brian. So he worked that shift the next day, and when I talked to him that night when he got off of work, he started telling me that he thought someone had been murdered at GameStop. Again, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I started asking him more about the details, and the only evidence that he found was some random pile of blood. It was located out of the store on the side of the building where most people usually don't go. He started telling me that he thought his manager had murdered someone. I jokingly told him that we shouldn't play Resident Evil anymore. We decided for a different game that night, and I didn't ask him to play Resident Evil again, and he never asked me to do so either. So whatever psychological change happened to my friend, it took place over the course of playing Resident Evil one time for a couple of hours. Weeks literally went by, and he was still talking about the pile of blood that he saw outside of GameStop. It would only happen on random occasions, according to him. I tried telling him that there must have been some kind of explanation for it. I mean, maybe someone was dumping sauce or something from the nearby stores. There was a pizza place in the same strip mall. He didn't buy it, though. He was thoroughly convinced that someone had been murdered and the murderer was draining out a small amount of blood and then putting it in this one spot outside of GameStop. He sounded really serious when he talked about it, and he never called the police or anything. He told me he asked his manager once about it, and his manager told him not to worry about it. It just didn't seem like that big of a deal. But I remember this one time we had been playing Call of Duty for about 3 hours one night. He started to talk about in detail and how much it freaked him out. He told me that he was having nightmares regularly and that he didn't like working at that GameStop anymore. I tried telling him that this wasn't a big situation and that he was just being wildly paranoid, but he wouldn't listen to me. It wasn't very long before he decided to quit that job at GameStop. It was really sad because he no longer got any of the perks of being an employee. This also meant that I didn't get any of the perks of being a friend of an employee, which also sucked. But Brian was very insistent that something was going on there. and he didn't want to end up getting murdered for knowing too much of some kind of criminal activity. A couple of days later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I just had to know where this pile of blood was coming from. It turned out that one of the other GameStop employees had been someone I went to high school with, and I messaged them on Facebook. I asked them about this mysterious pile of blood and everything, and then he told me this. The truck driver who occasionally delivers the games and merchandise to this GameStop had a truck that isn't the greatest. It isn't that large or anything, and it's the same one that always makes deliveries to the specific GameStop for some kind of logistical reason. The truck gets a certain amount of rust for some reason, and the truck driver cleans the truck off in this one particular spot every time he delivers there. When I found that out, I laughed uncontrollably for about 1 hour. Brian literally found a pile of rust and thought it was blood. As much as I love that guy like a brother and respect him as a person, things like this are why I have such a hard time taking him seriously. I only just messaged this guy on Facebook a day ago, and I haven't spoken to Brian since. He works at a restaurant now, and it's been really busy there. I'm not sure if I should even tell him, though. A part of me really wants to tell him and make fun of him, but I don't want to hurt his feelings too bad. I might low-key send him a link to a video about Rust and see if he connects the dots. And that's the story about my friend Brian, who isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, and how he was convinced that people were being murdered and their blood was being dumped outside of GameStop, but was actually just a pile of rust. This story didn't actually happen to me. It happened to my uncle. He works at a local Walmart in our small town and actually has a pretty solid thing going on over there. I know Walmart might not seem like the best place to work, but they actually pay their staff pretty well, all things considered. He's been working there for about 10 years now, and I think he's the assistant manager or something like that. I do know that he has seen a lot of weird stuff during his time working at Walmart. Everyone knows about how weird the general public can be, especially at places like Walmart. He's told me a couple of stories that I thought were either really funny or downright creepy. But I think this one has to top them all, because ever since I heard it, I haven't gone back to this Walmart. I don't want to after knowing this. What do I do when I have to buy stuff from Walmart? I drive to the one in the next town over. And I'm not even kidding. You could literally ask anyone that knows me. I actually do it. I know my uncle wasn't trying to scare me when he told me, but I can't unsee this entire event taking place. And I'm pretty sure the only reason he actually told me in the first place is because he thought I was into horror stories or whatever. Maybe I was before this entire thing, but not really anymore. So he started off by telling me that he was trying to climb the corporate ladder at Walmart. He wants to eventually become the manager for this local store in due time. But that means putting in more work and more effort than everyone else for a very long time and hoping that your energy is rewarded. One of the things he regularly had to sacrifice was a normal sleep schedule. They don't force you to work night shift, but one of the best ways to climb that corporate ladder, at least at the local store, was to volunteer for the night shift. I think he made a few dollars more an hour, but it was never worth it. You can't really have a life outside of work when you work from sundown to sunup. This story took place on one of those night shifts a couple of years back. It was a warm summer night, humid as you could imagine, and as you might imagine, there isn't much going on at Walmart late at night. The only reason it's even open is because if it wasn't, there wouldn't be any other stores in our town open at that time. He was the senior-most person on site that night, so if something went wrong, it was his responsibility, and if he couldn't handle it, he would have to call the store manager, which is never a good idea if you want to be on their good side. Well, one of the other workers had just brought in a few shopping carts, but they noticed something weird in the parking lot. There were 7 or 8 vehicles parked on the far side of the parking lot, and it looks like people were doing something. This other worker never specified what that was, but they were concerned enough that they asked my uncle to look into it, and so he did. I remember him telling me that it was really unusual to have people there at such a late time. He said it had to have been anywhere from 3:30 or 5 in the morning. He stepped outside and looked over. There were definitely a couple of people doing something over there, but he couldn't make it out from the store entrance. He started walking toward the crowd of people, and all of a sudden, they all started their cars at the same time. It was like they were waiting for someone to come out and confront them or something. Now, he was out in the middle of this parking lot, and all of those cars started driving toward him. And it wasn't like a casual drive either. He said they must have floored it, going straight for him. At least a few cars, too, so he couldn't jump anywhere. He said that he braced himself for impact and closed his eyes. A few seconds went by before he noticed that the cars had stopped on a dime in front of him. He had no idea what to do at that point. He was just standing there, looking into the dark-tinted windows of these mysterious cars in the Walmart parking lot being driven by who the heck knows who. He said that it was at this point that one of them rolled down the window and threw something at him. It hit him on his leg, and he was trying to determine whether or not he wanted to run back to the store or try to fight for his life. He was really expecting them all to get out of the car to attack him. Thankfully, that attack never came. He stood there for another few seconds before they all sped off into the night. When he looked down to analyze the object that they had thrown at him, he was mortified. It was actually a decapitated head. And even worse, it had no skin. You just have to imagine the way a human head looks without any skin. He threw up and fell to the floor. I'm sure it was in complete shock. He picked up his Walmart radio and screamed for help, and it wasn't very long before he ran back into the store and phoned the police. He spent a lot of time trying to remember license plates and what the vehicles look like. Unfortunately, I don't think it helped the police very much. I'm pretty sure the case is still unsolved to this day, but wait, it gets even scarier than that. Walmart, as you might imagine, has security cameras at their store and in their parking lot. Everyone was sure that the security camera footage would reveal exactly what had happened that night, but it didn't. The entire ordeal happened just out of frame, and this led the police to believe that whoever had done this had very intricate knowledge of Walmart security cameras. Of course, the implication there is that whoever had done this was someone who works or had previously worked at this local Walmart, and it's not like everyone uses the security cameras all the time, so that narrows down the number of potential suspects even further. But it never turned up anything meaningful. The severed head was the weirdest part, apparently. It was male, but its teeth were removed, and I heard DNA analysis with further forensics was unable to pull up any identity from around here or any missing person reports. Last I heard is that they were working with authorities across the border to cross-reference any information. Apparently every single person had a solid alibi with proof, and what makes the entire situation even weirder is the fact that it just seems like such a random crime to commit. I mean, what did they actually accomplish here? It just seems like a lot of planning and effort to do something really stupid, but I'll never understand gang activity or really who was involved. After this incident, rumors spread across town and everyone became a little anxious about going to this Walmart. I'm not the only one that feels this way. For a small border community like ours, something like this happening is a little unthinkable. It really changes the way you view your neighbors and the people that live in your area. Who would do this? And we don't know who. You just feel more anxious and suspicious of anyone that you meet. My family has told me that it seems like there are less people who go to local events like parades and such anymore after this incident, and I can't blame them. But yeah, that was my uncle's horrifying Walmart story that I still regularly think about. The reason I don't ever go to our local Walmart, and probably never will, ever again. I've been working at a clothing store in the mall for about 5 weeks. I was your typical high school graduate who wasn't sure if they wanted to go to college or not. I was just kind of working because I didn't really have anything else to do. A little background on me. I'm a pretty large guy. I'm 6 feet tall and I'm not some kind of gym freak, but I do consider myself more fit than most. I probably work out 3 or 4 times a week, and this has honestly been really cool, kind of being seen as the tough guy, I suppose. The day this happened, there were a lot more people than usual. I remember there being customers everywhere, and it just felt like there was no ending the day. I remember me and my coworkers rushing around and having this feeling of, wow, we don't have enough staff for this. It eventually slowed down as the day came to an end, and it was always nice because you kind of get a cool down. That is, if you work the entire day like I do. This happened during that slow. When it was somewhere between the late afternoon and night, probably had to have been about 6 or 7, the sun was still out, seeing as it was still summertime. A man, who was even taller than I was, walked into the store, and from the second he stepped foot on the premises, I knew that he had bad intentions. His body language was sending out a lot of freaky signals, and I started getting ready for some kind of confrontation. As much as I hated these kind of things, I knew that everyone was going to look at me to save the day, considering most of my other coworkers were female, and the only other guy was kind of small. The ominous man that had walked into the store was wearing a black sweatshirt and a dark pair of jeans. I at least remember that much. He walked over one of the clothing racks and literally threw it to the floor. Everyone in the store turned and looked at him, and he just kind of stood there for a second. I yelled and started walking over to him, and I saw him reach into his pocket. I'm not sure what kind of pistol he pulled out. I just remember him firing at me multiple times. I looked out and was only hit once in the arm, at least at first. I managed to get behind the register area to take cover. For some reason, he believed that he could fire through the counter, and so he tried, but the bullets started ricocheting. A couple of them hit some of the other coworkers, and they were all desperately trying to find cover, and one of them even ran away from the scene entirely. I knew this was going to be a bad situation because I remember having a conversation with one of the mall cops one time. They weren't allowed to carry guns, so if someone managed to get a gun inside of the mall and started opening fire, we were all going to have to wait for the actual police to show up. I knew the next 15 to 30 minutes was going to determine if I lived or not. I stayed behind the counter for as long as I could, but I heard him coming towards me, my heart pounding in my chest faster than I never felt it before. I was mortified, terrified that I was about to die. And for no good reason at that, some random guy with a gun decides to shoot up a clothing store in a mall. A few minutes have gone by and he hadn't fired another bullet. I wasn't sure if he had been reloading or if he ran out of bullets or maybe he was saving a few. I had no idea how many he had in a clip. I just remember the sound of footsteps running towards my direction. I knew he was coming my way, and I wasn't sure what I was even capable of doing at that point. My fight-or-flight response kicked in, and I figured the best chance I had was waiting for him to get on this other side of the counter where he could see me, and then I was going to have to tackle him. I knew that wasn't the best option, but I'm not sure what the other options I had. For some reason, he jumped over the counter. He landed right next to me, and this was perfect for me. He was close enough that we could get into a scuffle now, and maybe I had a chance of surviving this. I remember grabbing his leg and bringing him to the floor. He kicked me in the head, and man, that hurt. Almost knocked me out altogether, but I managed to keep going, probably only because the adrenaline my body was releasing. Once I got him onto the floor, I saw that he had dropped his gun. Considering the fact that he hadn't fired, I figured that he had been out of ammo and too hyped up to reload in the middle of a shooting. We fought on the floor for a good few minutes before someone else decided to join. I don't know why no one else joined sooner. I really could have used the help. It was just me and this deranged psychotic killer fighting on the floor of this mall for a good while. He wasn't the strongest guy in the world, but I was also fighting with a bullet wound in my arm, so he had an extreme advantage over me. He probably would have killed me with his bare hands had someone else not joined in and helped me. We managed to knock him unconscious, get the gun further away from him, and waited for the police to arrive. I remember this little experience being the talk of the area for many, many weeks. There were quite a few newspaper articles written about it all. I even got interviewed in one of them, and a journalist even called me a hero. And to be honest, nothing made me happier or more sadder in the world to read those words. It was just such a traumatic event. The guy was arrested, prosecuted, and I'm pretty sure he got life in prison. People started treating me like a real hero after this. In all honesty, I kind of felt like one. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not been there to take that guy on. There was no way any of my coworkers would have been able to fight with this guy, and if he had complete control of the situation, he could have taken a hostage or done something much worse. The bullet was removed from my arm, and unfortunately it did shatter a part of my humerus. I'm still recovering from that. But ever since this experience, I haven't viewed my physical strength as something that makes me cool or better than anyone. I view it as a way that I can protect people. I think this may have been the experience I needed because I think I might want to become a police officer after all this is said and done. So my mom's workplace was shot up a couple of weeks ago. It was a really traumatic experience for her, even though she wasn't physically injured or anything. The entire thing went on for about 2 hours, and I could just imagine how horrible it must have been. She works in some kind of logistics business. She's an assistant manager, and to be honest, I don't really know what they do. I just know that my mom works at this place and they do something with shipping and exporting. But that's the extent of my knowledge. So what happened, at least from what my mom told me, it had been a normal work day just like any other. And at around 2 p.m., after everyone had already had their lunch break and was getting back into the grind of working, people started hearing gunshots. There was an assembly line on the premises. Everyone just kind of assumed that those noises were machines of some kind that people had been working with. I guess hearing loud noises like that were fairly common, which is why no one expected anything. We now know that almost all of the production line workers had been murdered by the gunmen. No one knew what was going on there, and quite a few of the guys had noise-canceling headphones in anyway. From the gunman's perspective, that was the first and most logical place to start. After he had done this on the production line, he made his way to the main office. And to understand the route he took, you need to understand a little bit about the layout of it all. You see, he had to make his way through the regular offices where all of the normal workers were. The typical data entry positions and things like that were in front of the main management building. The management building, for lack of a better term, was where the higher-up workers were located. This included the marketing department, IT, and other businessmen and stuff like that. The guy's aim was to get to that management building and eliminate as many people from there as he could. This is where my mom and some of the other workers in the main building lucked out. Someone had just happened to be walking inside of the regular building out front, and they'd been taken hostage. He used this hostage to make his way out into the management building and didn't harm anyone as he passed through. Everyone got really stressed out, I'm sure, but he didn't hurt any of them. He just warned that if he heard any alarms going off, that he was going to murder that person. It was made worse by the fact that it was a younger woman, and most of the office knew that she was pregnant. It wasn't obvious that she was, but my mom and other coworkers had spoken to her, and she had taken the test and had been confirmed pregnant. Everyone complied with his orders and let him get through pretty easily. When he got inside of the management building, he had everyone organized into one small office. There were maybe 30 people in the management building. After about 15 minutes, the pregnant girl was released, and she was seen crying and running away from the building. What followed was a horrible massacre where he literally killed every single person in the higher management of the company. There were only 2 employees in higher management that happened to be out sick that day. All of the rest of them had their life ended in that moment. Someone had managed to call the police, and they arrived shortly after the incident. I guess the gunman had shot himself after he killed everyone in the management building. I guess in his mind the mission was accomplished. Now this happened a good little while ago, and the reason I'm only writing it now is because we recently found out the backstory as to why this guy did what he did. And the story goes like this. He had been working on the production line a couple of months back. Working on the line is tough, and as you might imagine, there's kind of a rough and gruff kind of people that work on that line. so I guess this guy was deemed too much of a pansy or something like that. They started bullying him, giving him a hard time every day. I guess that's what you call it. It sounds weird to say that about adults, but I don't know what the other word you would even use. He didn't handle the bullying very well, and as time went on, the other guys on the production line started messing with his work. Like they would mess with the work that he had finished. A lot of the guys claimed that it started out as good fun, but it just got out of hand. Well, I guess they went so far that this guy eventually got written up. And not just once, but quite a few times. He got written up enough that he was eventually fired, and it wasn't for any good reason either. From all accounts, he was an otherwise functional and productive worker who did his job and did it well. He just couldn't take a joke from some of the other guys on the line. Well, I guess he had a family to take care of. He had a newborn baby at home, and he had just been married to his wife for about 2 years. He had a hard time keeping a job, and this was supposed to be his stable job. When he was fired, he tried explaining the situation to his wife, but she didn't believe him. I guess it was enough that she decided to leave him and take the baby with her. She moved across the country and moved back with her parents and even got a restraining order on the guy in the following weeks. He blamed his coworkers for making his life what it was, and in management for not believing him that he was doing his job right, and especially for firing him. It was honestly a really sad situation, and on some level, I kind of get why he did what he did. This guy literally lost his baby, his wife, and his entire life because some guys on the production line took a practical joke a little bit too far. The worst part is that my mom had actually spoken to him a few times while he had worked there. She said that he was the nicest guy from the production line because he didn't curse or talk down to women. I know that she didn't know him well, but the fact that this guy was at least a halfway polite person in normal situations makes me even more sad about the entire situation as a whole. As you might imagine, the company is shutting down this location. They haven't been able to find enough people to replace all the management positions that they tragically lost that day. And it makes sense. Even if you could find qualified people to go there, who wants to go and work in the location that literally just got shot up by an insane gunman? Since this whole experience, my mom has started working in a library. She said that she hopes that it will be a more stable work environment and hopes to never live through a traumatic event like that ever again. So, I have this friend. They're a little bit off the walls. One of those conspiracy theorists, very much into the paranormal types of people. I'm talking about the kind of person that watches the X-Files and thinks it's probably true. Of course, she dresses up like she's just playing around and doesn't actually believe in it wholeheartedly, but I'm smart enough to know that she uses humor as a way to distance herself from what she actually believes. I think some of the crazy stuff that she says she actually thinks. No, this isn't to disparage her or anything like that. She's an otherwise really nice person, and she only starts talking about this kind of stuff once you get her going. Sometimes we can go days without ever talking about ghosts or aliens or anything else like that, but if someone starts talking about feeling a spirit in the room, that's the end of it for the night. I just wanted to give you that background because I feel it's very pertinent to the story. Well, this particular friend happens to work at Walmart. There have been a lot of recent changes lately, and what happened is that she got stuck on the night shift. I'm sure you can imagine how this went. He puts someone that's into paranormal stuff on night shift, and the next thing you know, they have 1,000,001 different stories about ghosts and monsters and everything else. That's kind of how it went for the first few weeks. Every time I hung out with her, she would talk about how horrible it was to be working on night shift, and then she would start talking about all of the monsters and creatures that she would see out of the corner of her eye. I just remember thinking to myself multiple times if she actually believes that she sees stuff while she's at work. Well, as time went on, she became much more mild with the stories. I guess she had gotten used to working the night shift at Walmart. And then I remember there being one party that we went to. It was me, her, and a bunch of other people from our friend group. It wasn't one of those crazy alcohol-filled adventures as you see in movies or anything like that. It was much more of a bunch of friends getting together and hanging out. I mean, we're all adults and everything, The person whose house we're hanging out at owned the home, but I don't know what else we could have called it other than a party. Anyway, my one perceptive friend had a little bit too much to drink this night, and she started going on about her job like usual. And then all of a sudden, things took a turn for the worse. She started talking about seeing a dead person walking around the store. I remember her talking about the exact details of how he died. She claimed that he had shot himself in the heart, and she saw him walking around Walmart late at night when no one else was around. Some of our other friends were less hesitant to call her out on this nonsense, and she started getting really offended. She left that night after, and in retrospect, I probably should have stopped her from driving home considering that she was extremely intoxicated. If I'm going to be honest with you, that didn't even cross my mind until the next morning. This guy that ended his life by shooting himself in the heart became the only thing she ever talked about when it came to the ghosts and whatnot of her night shift job at Walmart. I found it really strange. It was one of the less believable stories that she would tell us about. I mean, she would always talk about there being a pack of wolves in the forest on the other side of the Walmart parking lot, but it just didn't have the same glamour that that story about the guy did. The thought of there being some zombie walking around Walmart at night that only she could see seemed ridiculous as it sounds, and I just kind of chalked it up to her own mental problems for it all. Well, a couple of months went by. She was still on this, guy shooting himself in the heart guy kick, even after all this time. I decided to do some research on this specific Walmart to prove her that no one had ever died or near the premises, especially in that way. I remember getting my laptop out one night and Googling this local Walmart's address. I'm going to spare any identifying details for obvious reasons. I read about every single death that had occurred on this premise since the place was built in the 1980s. I read about one guy who accidentally died of a stroke in '85. I read about there being a terrible accident with a forklift about 7 years ago. And I didn't see anything about some guy shooting himself in the heart or anything of that nature. I was just about to be done with my research, and I was in that post-research phase where I just kind of was reading about random information aimlessly. And that's when I came across the news archives that I couldn't believe. It had been written during this time that the Walmart was being built, and the story went like this. One of the crew members who was responsible for building the Walmart had some serious problems. His only son died at 10 years old, and I guess this guy never really recovered after that. He had taken his own life after working the graveyard shift one night. The article talked about him being the only person that was willing to work all the way to 12 a.m. and sometimes later, as this was apparently before 24-hour Walmarts. He had a shotgun in his truck, and then he ended his own life right in the forest nearby. And here's the crazy part. He shot himself in the chest exactly the way my friend had described. I hadn't told my friend about this. I know I would never hear the end of it, but I just find it so strange that her weird, goofy little interest in the paranormal somehow uncovered something like this. Now every time she talks about ghosts or the paranormal, I make sure to start listening for something that might be true. And don't get me wrong, I try to filter out the obvious hoopla, but now that I've seen her get something unbelievably right once, I'm just waiting for her to do it again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.